Hello, my dear friends, I'm operator Starsky, and today on day 1244 of Russia's three-day war against Ukraine, we will talk about stalling Russia's advance, Russia compensating this with increased airstrikes against Ukrainian cities. We'll also try to understand how effective that is, and additionally, we'll check out the recent updates on Donald Trump's ultimatums to the internationally wanted war criminal Putin, and also a cyber attack that might have embarrassed Russian Gazprom big time. My dear friends, you're watching the Frontline Focus. Let's roll. The past week has been absolutely packed with major events, record-breaking drone attacks, huge missile strikes on Ukrainian cities. But let's start with July 16th, when Terror Russia launched a massive attack, around 400 Shahed drones and a ballistic missile targeting multiple Ukrainian cities. We're talking Kharkiv, Kryvyi Rih, Vinnytsia, Odessa, and Kherson. According to reports, civilian infrastructure was hit again. At least 15 civilians unfortunately were injured. After attacking civilians, Russian terrorists traditionally reported hitting military targets, which probably even Russian propagandists don't believe anymore. On July 21st, Russia hit Kyiv one more time. The terrorist attack happened just hours before a big international meeting on support for Ukraine, the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, which of course was not a coincidence in my opinion, and basically the message was simple: look what we can still do. Terror Russian missiles hit the Shevchenkivsky and Darnitsky districts, damaging a subway station, a kindergarten, and a supermarket. 2 people lost their lives, at least 15 injured, including a child. The Russia keeps pushing the same narrative that they don't hit civilians. However, it's an obvious fact that when Russian terrorists cannot break the Ukrainian army on the battlefield, they go after civilians, they go after power plants, heating systems, and kindergartens. And this pattern has been repeated since winter 2022. We can see the same logic, same results, except now Ukraine strikes back. Over the past week, Kyiv launched what might be its biggest drone campaign yet, more than 230 drones targeting Russia's capital and surrounding regions. As a result, all major Moscow airports, Sheremetyevo, Domodedovo, Vnukovo, even Zhukovsky, were shut down. Some were shut down repeatedly, with over 140 flights cancelled. And it wasn't just Moscow, because St. Petersburg also got a taste on July 17th, when 122 good Ukrainian drones were launched in a single night. For a city that calls itself Russia's cultural capital, I think that was a very loud new soundtrack. And the reason it matters is because Ukraine keeps proving that it can still hit Russia where it hurts: Russian military bases, Russian airfields, basically inside the bubble of safety that Russian terrorists thought they had. This sends a clear message to the Russian terrorists that their war is coming home. Now let's speculate just a bit on why Russia is ramping up its drone strikes, and also on what's really happening on the front lines in Ukraine. Let's start with the big picture, because over the past several months Russia has been pushing hard along multiple axes in places like Donetsk, Pokrovsk, and around Kharkiv. And while Russia is still gaining ground, the pace of those gains has dropped significantly compared to last year. How do we know that? Let's take a look at the numbers. From November 2024 up to now, Russia captured about 617 square kilometers around Konstantinivka and about 1,394 square kilometers around Pokrovsk. And while that sounds like a lot, but if you break it down, that is basically just about 2.4 square kilometers per day in Konstantinivka and 5.5 square kilometers per day in Pokrovsk. Compare that to last year, when Russia was averaging roughly 10 square kilometers a day during its offensive, and you will clearly see the slowdown. Also, compare it to almost 500,000 square kilometers of Ukraine's territory still free from the Russian invaders. And even in western Donetsk, which has been one of the most active sectors this year, Russia added about 1,057 square kilometers between January and July 2025. That would be their daily gains in March-April 2022. Also consider that Russia increased its recruitment rate. It involved North Korea, China, Iran, it involved numerous mercenaries from all around the world, and it's literally pushing with all it has on a daily basis with almost zero results. And while there's a lot of propagandists out there who keep hallucinating about Ukraine losing all of its army and getting ready to fall apart in just a couple of weeks, but instead of increased collapse of Ukraine, we can see that the only thing truly collapsing is Russia's advance. Why is this happening? For a couple of reasons. First of all, Ukraine has had more time to build deeper defensive lines, lay down minefields, and strengthen key positions. So even though Russia is throwing huge numbers of troops and equipment, they're hitting harder resistance. We're also seeing Russia rely heavily on drones and missiles. Over 700 drones were launched in a single night just recently. But even with this intensity, the ground gains remain limited, and you probably already know the main reason. The Russian stockpile of armored vehicles is depleting, and Chinese golf carts cannot supplant combat vehicles on the front. The bottom line is that the fight is far from over, but the weak Russian advances we saw last year became even slower, and that is why Russia relies massively on its drone strikes, trying to break through Ukraine's air defenses and inflict as much damage as possible on Ukraine's civilian infrastructure. In order to reinforce the psychological effect from their drone strikes on Ukrainian civilians, the terror Russians recently invited cameras to film their pride and joy, a drone death factory. Yes, my friends, the Russian state TV showed off their Shahed production facility in Alabuga. Russian propagandists showed rows of partially assembled drones, few technicians pretending to look busy, and some military officials saying how innovative those machines are. And while such massive numbers of terror Russian drones may look menacing, that's exactly what Ukraine's intelligence was talking about earlier this year. And of course, Ukrainian defenders did everything possible to prepare to counter this threat. We're talking electronic warfare, interceptor drones, and other things that we cannot really talk about right now. Alright, let's switch real quick from the battleground to the political theater. On July 14th, President Trump made headlines by announcing a new arms package for Ukraine. We're talking Patriot systems, long-range artillery, and things like that. And the most interesting part about it is that this package is being financed by European partners. So Washington is basically shifting some of the financial weight to Europe, but the weapons are still flowing to Ukraine. Trump also gave Russia a 50-day ultimatum to stop the war or face severe tariffs. Now, tariffs might sound like a weird tool in the middle of a war, even though Kremlin's economy is already running on duct tape and oil exports, and I think that tariffs won't work as a deterrence against Russia. But we have a clear sign that Europe and the US will work together to provide Ukraine with necessary defense aid. European officials called to spend these 50 days ramping up Ukraine's defense aid, which in my opinion is absolutely proper thing to do. And now one of the week's most interesting stories, a cyber attack on Gasprom. Ukrainian intelligence allegedly wiped databases, locked out 20,000 administrative accounts, and corrupted key systems in the Gazprom intranet. If it's true, this is absolutely massive because Gazprom is basically Russia's money printer. It funds the war, it pays for the missiles, and also keeps the propaganda machine running. Disrupt all that and you are hitting Moscow right in the wallet. And in addition to that, I think several compromised popular YouTubers will have harder time receiving their rubles. And with that, my dear friends and family, I wish you all a beautiful day. Please subscribe to stay informed about the most important updates and share this content to help Ukraine be heard. I'll see you in the comments. I'm Operator Starsky. As always, be safe.